The steam hissed like a dying serpent as the train ground to a halt at Petaluma station, and through the white clouds of vapor emerged a figure so fragile that several onlookers wondered if the California wind might simply carry her away. Sarah Brennan clutched her carpetbag with fingers gone white at the knuckles, her legs threatening to buckle beneath layers of dusty gray traveling dress that had seen better days somewhere back east. The late afternoon sun of 1878 blazed overhead, turning the wooden platform into something that shimmered and wavered before her exhausted eyes. She had been traveling for 17 days from Philadelphia, each mile taking her further from everything she had known and closer to a man whose face she had seen only once in a faded photograph. The trembling started in her hands and spread through her entire body until her teeth chattered despite the autumn heat. She was 22 years old and had just made the most desperate decision of her life. The platform was crowded with ranch hands, merchants, and families greeting loved ones, but Sarah saw none of them clearly. Her vision had gone spotty around the edges, and the world tilted dangerously to one side. She had eaten nothing but stale bread for 2 days, rationing her meager funds, and the relentless motion of the train had left her stomach in perpetual revolt. Now, standing on solid ground that still seemed to rock beneath her feet, she searched the sea of unfamiliar faces for the man who was supposed to become her husband, Thomas Mercer. That was the name on the letters, a cattle rancher seeking a wife, promising security and respectability. The photograph had shown a stern-faced man with a thick mustache and cold eyes, but Sarah had been in no position to be particular. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving nothing but debts. Her mother had passed when Sarah was 12. She had no siblings, no inheritance, and no prospects beyond a factory job that would have slowly killed her spirit before it destroyed her body. The advertisement in the Philadelphia Ledger had seemed like Providence itself reaching down to save her. Now, scanning the crowd with increasingly panicked eyes, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "Miss Brennan." A voice cut through the chaos, but it did not belong to the man from the photograph. This voice was younger, rougher, edged with something that might have been concern. "Miss Sarah Brennan from Philadelphia." She turned toward the speaker and found herself looking at a man who could not have been the rancher she was promised to. He was tall and lean, probably no more than 25, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water after rain. He wore dusty trail clothes, leather chaps over worn denim, and a hat pushed back to reveal hair the shade of prairie wheat. A gun belt sat low on his hips, and everything about him spoke of long days under an open sky. "I am Sarah Brennan," she managed to say, though her voice came out thin and reedy. The platform seemed to lurch beneath her feet. "Are you Mr. Mercer?" Something flickered across the cowboy's face, an emotion too quick to name. "No, madam, my name is Caleb Winters. I work for Mr. Mercer. He sent me to fetch you." The word fetch struck Sarah as particularly ominous, as though she were a package to be collected rather than a person. Her trembling intensified. "Where is Mr. Mercer? He said in his letters that he would meet me personally." Caleb Winters shifted his weight, and now Sarah could see the discomfort plainly written across his features. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then seemed to steel himself. Mr. Mercer was called away on business, important business with the railroad company. "He asked me to bring you out to the ranch and get you settled." It was a lie. Sarah did not know how she knew this with such certainty, but she did. Perhaps it was the way Caleb's eyes would not quite meet hers, or the tightness around his mouth, or simply the bone-deep instinct that comes from having survived on nothing but wits and prayer for the past 6 months. Whatever the reason, She knew with absolute conviction that Thomas Mercer had not been called away on business, and that Caleb Winters was trying to spare her feelings about something. "What is the truth, Mr. Winters?" she asked quietly. Caleb looked startled, then impressed, then resigned, all in the space of a heartbeat. He glanced around the crowded platform and seemed to make a decision. "This is not a conversation for a public place, Miss Brennan. Let me get your trunk loaded and take you somewhere you can sit down. You look about ready to fall over." He was right about that. Sarah's legs were trembling so violently now that she feared they might simply give out. The edges of her vision had gone gray and fuzzy, and a cold sweat had broken out across her forehead despite the warmth of the day. She nodded mutely, and Caleb immediately stepped closer. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentling in a way that reminded Sarah of how her father had once spoken to spooked horses. "When did you last eat?" "I had some bread yesterday morning," Sarah admitted. The platform tilted again, more severely this time, and she felt Caleb's hand close around her elbow, steady and warm. "Yesterday morning," he repeated, and there was something like anger in his voice now, though Sarah sensed it was not directed at her. "Did Mercer send you traveling money?" "He sent enough for the train ticket," Sarah said. "I had a little saved, but it ran out in Kansas." Caleb muttered something under his breath that Sarah was fairly certain would have scandalized the ladies of Philadelphia's church auxiliary. "Right. First thing is getting some food into you before you collapse. The truth can wait another hour. Do not argue with me on this, Miss Brennan. You are swaying like a willow in a windstorm." He was not wrong. Sarah found she had no energy left for protest. She let Caleb guide her through the crowd, his hand firm on her elbow, while he collected her battered trunk with his free hand as though it weighed nothing at all. The people on the platform parted around them, and Sarah was dimly aware of curious eyes following her progress. She must have made quite a sight, dusty and pale and clinging to the arm of a cowboy she had just met. Caleb led her down the platform steps to where a wagon waited, hitched to two sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat with surprising gentleness, then secured her trunk in the back. Within moments, they were moving through the streets of Petaluma, and Sarah got her first real look at the town that was supposed to become her home. It was larger than she had expected, bustling with commerce and energy. False-fronted buildings lined wide dirt streets, their painted signs advertising everything from dry goods to legal services. She glimpsed a hotel, a bank, a saloon, a general store, and what looked like a church with a white steeple. Men on horseback trotted past wagons laden with supplies. Women in calico and cotton moved along wooden sidewalks, some carrying parcels, others herding children. The air smelled of dust and horse, and something cooking that made Sarah's empty stomach clench with longing. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a small restaurant with cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. "Can you walk, or should I carry you?" he asked, and he did not sound like he was joking. "I can walk," Sarah insisted, though she was not entirely sure this was true. She managed to climb down from the wagon without falling, which she counted as a victory, and let Caleb guide her into the restaurant. The interior was clean and bright, with half a dozen tables covered in checkered cloths. A plump woman with graying hair looked up from behind a counter and immediately bustled forward. "Caleb Winters, what have you done to this poor girl? She looks half dead." "Not my doing, Mrs. Patterson," Caleb said. "This is Miss Brennan, just arrived from Philadelphia. She has not eaten since yesterday morning." Mrs. Patterson made a clicking sound with her tongue that conveyed an entire sermon's worth of disapproval. "Sit her down, sit her down. I will bring soup and bread and coffee if she can stomach it." Sarah found herself deposited into a chair at a corner table while Mrs. Patterson hurried away, still muttering. Caleb sat across from her, his hat now in his hands, and for the first time Sarah got a clear look at his face in proper light. He was handsome, she realized with a strange little jolt. Not in the polished way of Eastern gentlemen, but in a way that spoke of clean living and honest work. His face was sun-weathered but young, with strong bones and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though it was not smiling now. His eyes were kind, she thought. Whatever else might be true about Caleb Winters, his eyes were kind. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For this, you did not have to." "Yes, I did," Caleb replied, and there was something fierce in his voice. "You are not livestock, Miss Brennan, no matter how Mercer chooses to treat you." Before Sarah could ask what he meant by that, Mrs. Patterson returned with a tray bearing a bowl of chicken soup, thick slices of bread with butter, and a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. Sarah's hands shook as she lifted the spoon, and she had to concentrate to keep from spilling as she brought it to her lips. The soup was hot and rich, and possibly the most delicious thing Sarah had ever tasted. She ate slowly, aware that her stomach would rebel if she rushed, but it took all her willpower not to simply gulp it down. Caleb sat quietly across from her, not speaking, just letting her eat. By the time she had finished half the bowl and one slice of bread, color was returning to her cheeks and the trembling had mostly subsided. "Better?" Caleb asked. "Much better," Sarah admitted. "Thank you, Mr. Winters. Caleb is fine," he said. "I am not much for formality." Sarah took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest, and decided she could not wait any longer for answers. "Tell me the truth now, please. Where is Thomas Mercer, and why did he not come to meet me himself?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands, and Sarah could see him wrestling with something. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "Thomas Mercer is at the Dusty Rose Saloon, same as he is every afternoon. He sent me to collect you because he could not be bothered to leave his poker game." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Sarah sat very still, absorbing this information and all that it implied. "I see," she said quietly. "And is this typical behavior for Mr. Mercer?" Caleb met her eyes then, and what she saw in his face made her stomach clench again, this time having nothing to do with hunger. "Miss Brennan, I am going to be honest with you because I think you deserve that much. Thomas Mercer is a drunk and a gambler. He owns a ranch, that part is true, but he has run it into the ground. Half the cattle are gone, sold to pay debts. The hands quit faster than he can replace them. I am one of only 3 men left, and I have been looking for other work myself." Sarah felt as though the floor had opened beneath her chair. "Then, why did he advertise for a wife?" "He needs someone to cook and clean and keep house," Caleb said bluntly. "He sees marriage as a cheaper alternative to hiring help. I am sorry to be crude about it, but that is the truth." The restaurant seemed to spin around Sarah. She had known, of course, that marriage to a stranger through advertisement was a gamble. She had known that reality might not match the promises in carefully written letters. But she had not expected this, had not braced herself for the casual cruelty of a man who could not even be bothered to collect his bride from the train station. "I have no money to return east," she heard herself say. "I used everything I had for the ticket here. I have nowhere else to go." "I know," Caleb said, and the sympathy in his voice was almost harder to bear than the awful news had been. "That is why I agreed to fetch you, even though every part of me wanted to send Mercer a telegram telling him to collect his own bride. I figured you deserved to have someone meet you who would at least see you fed and tell you the truth of things." Sarah set down her coffee cup very carefully, afraid she might drop it otherwise. Her hands had started trembling again. "What should I do?" "That depends," Caleb said. "Do you want my honest advice, or do you want me to take you out to the ranch as planned?" Your honest advice, Sarah said without hesitation. Caleb leaned forward, his creek-water eyes intense on hers. Run. There is a boarding house in town run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. She is decent and fair. I will pay for a week's lodging for you, and in that time you can find work. Petaluma is a good town with good people. The hotel needs help in the kitchen. The general store needs a clerk. The school teacher is getting on in years and could use an assistant. You have options here that do not involve tying yourself to a man who will use you up and cast you aside. Why would you do that for me? Sarah asked, bewildered. You do not know me at all. Because it is the right thing to do, Caleb said simply. And because I have watched Thomas Mercer destroy everything he touches for the past year, I will not stand by and watch him destroy a person. Sarah looked down at her half-finished soup, her mind racing. Everything Caleb said made sense. The smart thing, the sensible thing, would be to accept his offer and avoid the disaster that marriage to Thomas Mercer would surely become. But accepting charity from a stranger, even well-meant charity, went against every fiber of her Philadelphia upbringing. She had been raised to pay her own way, to earn her keep, to never be beholden. If I took work in town, she said slowly, how long before I could afford my own lodging? A month, maybe 2, Caleb said. Depends on what work you found and how much it paid. But Miss Brennan, I want you to understand something. This is not charity I am offering. This is me trying to prevent a wrong before it happens. Mercer lied to you in those letters. He painted a picture of a life that does not exist. You deserve a chance to find something real instead. You are a good man, Caleb Winters, Sarah said, and she meant it with her whole heart. But I need to think about this. I need to see Mr. Mercer for myself before I make a decision. Will you take me to meet him? Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. If that is what you want. But I am taking you to him in town, in public. I am not leaving you alone with him at the ranch until I know you will be safe. The fact that he felt the need to specify this told Sarah everything she needed to know about Thomas Mercer's character. She finished her soup in silence while Caleb settled the bill with Mrs. Patterson, refusing to let Sarah contribute the few coins she had left. Then they were back in the wagon, rolling through Petaluma's streets toward what Sarah assumed would be the Dusty Rose Saloon. The establishment was exactly what she expected. A rough building with swinging doors and the sound of male voices and piano music drifting out into the street. Caleb helped Sarah down from the wagon and then paused, his hand still on her elbow. You do not have to do this, he said quietly. We can turn around right now. I need to see him, Sarah replied. I need to know what I am refusing. Caleb nodded and pushed through the swinging doors with Sarah close behind him. The interior of the saloon was dimly lit and thick with tobacco smoke. A dozen men stood at the bar or sat at tables, drinking and talking. A tired-looking woman played a jangling tune on an out-of-tune piano. Every eye in the place turned toward Sarah the moment she entered, and she felt the weight of their curiosity like a physical thing. Where is he? Sarah asked Caleb. Caleb jerked his chin toward a table in the back corner. There, the one in the brown vest. Sarah followed his gaze and saw a man who matched the photograph from the letters, though time and dissipation had not been kind to him. Thomas Mercer was perhaps 40 years old, thick around the middle, with graying hair and a mustache stained yellow by tobacco. His face was flushed with drink, his eyes bloodshot. He held a hand of cards and was laughing at something one of the other players had said. Sarah walked toward the table with her spine straight and her chin up, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. Caleb followed a step behind, a silent and reassuring presence. When she stopped beside Mercer's chair, he glanced up at her with bleary annoyance. What? He demanded. Mr. Mercer, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I am Sarah Brennan, your bride. For a moment Mercer just stared at her, and Sarah saw the exact instant when recognition dawned. He did not look pleased. He looked irritated, as though she were an inconvenience he had forgotten about. Already, he said. I sent Winters to collect you. Why are you here? I wanted to meet you, Sarah said. Mercer waved a dismissive hand. Well, you have met me. Winters, take her out to the ranch and get her settled. I will be along later. No, Sarah said. The word dropped into the saloon like a gunshot. Mercer's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I said no, Sarah repeated, and now she could feel every man in the saloon listening. I came here believing your letters, Mr. Mercer. Believing your promises of a home and partnership and respect, but you could not even be bothered to meet me at the train. You sent your hired man while you sat here drinking and gambling. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of husband you would be. Mercer's face flushed darker, and he shoved back from the table so violently that his chair scraped against the floorboards. You ungrateful little nobody, he snarled. I paid for your train ticket. You owe me. A train ticket is not the price of a person, Sarah said, though her heart was hammering now and fear clawed at her throat. I owe you nothing. Mercer reached for her arm, but before his fingers could close around her wrist, Caleb stepped forward and caught the other man's hand in a grip that made Mercer wince. That is enough, Caleb said, and his voice had gone cold and flat. The lady has made her decision. Leave her be. This is not your business, Winters, Mercer spat. I am making it my business, Caleb replied. And unless you want everyone in Petaluma to know exactly what kind of man you are, you will walk away right now. For a long moment the two men stared at each other, and Sarah held her breath. Then Mercer jerked his hand free and stepped back. Fine, he said. Take the skinny little mouse. She would have been more trouble than she was worth anyway. You are fired, Winters. Do not bother coming back to the ranch. Was not planning on it, Caleb said evenly. He turned to Sarah and offered his arm. Miss Brennan, may I escort you out? Sarah took his arm gratefully, and together they walked out of the saloon while every eye followed them. It was not until they were back in the sunlight, back in the wagon and moving away from the dusty rows, that Sarah began to shake again. This time, it was not from hunger or exhaustion, but from the enormity of what she had just done. You are safe now, Caleb said quietly, and Sarah turned to look at him. He was watching the road ahead, his profile calm and sure in the late afternoon light. I promise you, you are safe now. I will take you to Mrs. Chen's and we will figure out the rest from there. Sarah believed him. Against all reason, having known this man for barely 2 hours, she believed him completely. You just lost your job because of me, she said. I was going to quit anyway, Caleb replied with a shrug. Mercer just saved me the trouble. Besides, I have some money saved and I am a fair hand with horses. I will find work. What about your family? Sarah asked. Will they mind that you have involved yourself in this? No family to speak of, Caleb said. My parents passed when I was 16. I have been on my own since then, working ranches from Texas to California. No ties, no obligations, which means I am free to help a lady in distress without answering to anyone. There was something both sad and liberating in that statement. Sarah, who had spent her whole life surrounded by the rules and expectations of Philadelphia society, could hardly imagine such freedom. I do not know how I will ever repay you, she said softly. Do not worry about that now, Caleb said. Let us just get you settled and rested. Tomorrow we can start figuring out what comes next. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a neat 2-story building painted white with green shutters. Mrs. Chen herself was a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Sarah, and immediately ushered her upstairs to a clean room with a real bed, a washstand, and curtains that moved in the breeze from an open window. "You rest," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Mr. Winters has paid for the week. Tomorrow we talk about work." Sarah was too exhausted to protest. She thanked Caleb one more time, promised to see him the next day, and then collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. She was asleep before the sun had fully set. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of cooking food drifting up from downstairs. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory returned in a rush. She was in Petaluma, California. She had refused Thomas Mercer. She had no prospects and no plan, but she was alive and she was free. After washing her face and changing into her only other dress, a worn blue cotton that had been mended more times than she could count, Sarah went downstairs. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, cooking breakfast for the handful of boarders who sat at a long table. She waved Sarah to an empty chair and set a plate of eggs and toast in front of her without comment. The other boarders were all men, ranch hands and laborers who nodded politely to Sarah, but did not press her with questions. She ate in grateful silence, savoring the simple pleasure of a hot meal she had not had to worry about paying for. When the men had finished and left for their various jobs, Mrs. Chen sat down across from Sarah with a cup of tea. "Mr. Winters tells me you need work," she said without preamble. "What can you do?" "I can cook and clean," Sarah said. "I can sew and mend. I can read and write and do figures. I worked in my father's accounting office before he passed." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose. "You can do accounting?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I am quite good at it, actually. My father trained me." Mrs. Chen sipped her tea thoughtfully. "The bank might need help. They are very busy with all the new ranches and farms, but they might not hire a woman for accounting work." "Then I will work wherever will have me," Sarah said. "I am not particular." "You are proud," Mrs. Chen observed. "But not too proud. That is good. I will ask around today. Come back this afternoon and I will tell you what I learn." Sarah spent the morning walking through Petaluma, getting her bearings and seeing what kind of town she had landed in. It was a prosperous place, she could see that. The businesses looked well maintained. The people seemed friendly enough, though she got plenty of curious glances as a stranger. She found the church Caleb had mentioned, a simple white building with a cross on top. She found the school, a one-room structure where she could hear children reciting lessons. At midday, Caleb found her sitting on a bench near the town square, watching wagons roll past. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his face freshly shaved and his clothes brushed free of dust. He looked younger somehow, and Sarah felt her heart do a strange little skip when he smiled at her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her. "Better than yesterday," Sarah admitted. "Mrs. Chen is asking around about work for me." "She is good at that," Caleb said. "Half the businesses in town hire through her recommendations." He paused, then added, "I found work myself this morning. The livery stable needs a hand. The pay is not much, but it comes with a room in the loft, so I will manage." "I am glad," Sarah said sincerely. "I was worried about you." "Worried about me?" Caleb looked surprised. "Miss Brennan, you are the one who just turned her entire life upside down. I am fine." "We both turned our lives upside down yesterday," Sarah pointed out. "And please call me Sarah. After everything you have done for me, I think we can dispense with formality." "Sarah," Caleb said, trying the name out. "All right. And you have been calling me Caleb already, so we are even." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the town go about its business. Sarah found herself acutely aware of Caleb's presence beside her, the solid warmth of him, the way his shoulder was just inches from hers. It was strange how quickly she had come to feel safe around him, as though they had known each other for years instead of a single day. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said after a while. "Anything? Why did you really help me? I know you said it was the right thing to do, but there must have been more to it than that. You risked your job, your livelihood." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I had a sister once, older than me by 3 years. After our parents died, she tried to keep us together, but we had no money and no family to take us in. She answered an advertisement similar to yours, married a rancher in Arizona. She thought it would solve everything, that she could send for me once she was settled." "What happened?" Sarah asked softly, though she was not sure she wanted to know. "He was a cruel man," Caleb said flatly. "Beat her regularly, worked her half to death. She lasted 8 months before she tried to run. He caught her, and in the fight that followed, she fell down the stairs. Broke her neck." Sarah drew in a sharp breath. "Caleb, I am so sorry." "It was 7 years ago," Caleb said, "but I never forgot, never stopped wishing I had been old enough, strong enough, smart enough to protect her. When I saw you step off that train yesterday, trembling and scared and so thin I could practically see through you, all I could think was that you looked like Lily did in that last letter she sent me. And I thought, here is a chance to do right by someone the way I could not do right by my sister." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. She reached over and took Caleb's hand, squeezing gently. "You have done more than right by me. You have given me a chance I would not have had otherwise. Your sister would be proud of you." Caleb turned his hand to clasp hers properly, and they sat like that for a long moment, connected by grief and gratitude and something else neither of them was quite ready to name. That afternoon, Sarah returned to Mrs. Chen's boarding house and learned that the general store was looking for a clerk. The pay was modest but steady, and the owner, a German immigrant named Mr. Hoffman, was willing to give her a trial. Sarah started work the next morning and within a week had proven herself so competent that Mr. Hoffman increased her wages and her hours. The work was not difficult, but it was constant. Sarah measured out flour and sugar, cut fabric to order, tallied accounts, and helped customers find what they needed. Her skill with numbers impressed Mr. Hoffman, who soon had her managing the inventory and keeping the books. For the first time in months, Sarah felt useful and valued. She saw Caleb nearly every day. He would stop by the store on his lunch break, or she would visit the livery stable after work to watch him gentle a nervous horse or repair a broken harness. They fell into an easy friendship, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah told him about Philadelphia, about her father's accounting business and her mother's flower garden. Caleb told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the wide open spaces that had shaped him. As weeks turned into months, Sarah realized she was falling in love. It happened so gradually that she could not point to a single moment when friendship became something more. But one evening in late November, as they sat together on the porch of the boarding house watching the stars come out, Caleb said something that made her laugh, and when she turned to look at him, she was struck by the sudden fierce wish that she could stay in this moment forever. That she could spend the rest of her life sitting beside this kind, honest, gentle man who had saved her without expecting anything in return. Winter came to Petaluma with cool rains that turned the streets to mud. Sarah had saved enough by December to move out of Mrs. Chen's boarding house and into a tiny room above the general store that Mr. Hoffman rented to her for almost nothing. It was cramped and sparse, but it was hers, and she took fierce pride in making it comfortable. She bought fabric remnants and sewed curtains. She found a battered chair at the second-hand shop and repaired it. She picked wildflowers and put them in a jar on the windowsill. Caleb helped her move her few possessions, carrying her trunk up the narrow stairs, and then standing in the middle of her little room looking impossibly large and out of place. Sarah made tea on the small stove and they sat together, her on the repaired chair and him on the trunk, and talked about how strange it was that 3 months ago they had not even known each other existed. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had gotten on that train back to Philadelphia somehow," Sarah said. "If I had borrowed money or sold everything I owned." "Do you wish you had?" Caleb asked quietly. "No," Sarah said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. Everything that happened, as frightening as it was, led me here. To this town, to this life, to you." The last 2 words hung in the air between them, fragile and significant. Caleb set down his teacup very carefully. "Sarah," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "I need to tell you something." "All right," Sarah said, though her heart was beating so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "These past 3 months have been the best of my life," Caleb said. "I wake up every morning looking forward to seeing you. I go to sleep every night thinking about something you said that made me laugh or made me think. I know I am just a ranch hand with no prospects and no property. I know you deserve someone better, someone who can give you the kind of life you should have. But I have to tell you the truth. I am in love with you, Sarah Brennan. I have been for weeks now, and I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Sarah felt as though all the air had been knocked from her lungs. Joy and relief and wonder flooded through her in equal measure. "You think you have no prospects," she managed to say. "Caleb, you are the finest man I have ever known. You are kind and honest and hardworking. You gave up your job to protect a stranger. You have shown me more respect and care in 3 months than I received in 22 years back east. If you think I deserve someone better than you, then you have not been paying attention." Caleb stared at her. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I love you too," Sarah said, and saying the words out loud felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. "I think I have loved you since the moment you told me I was safe, since the moment you saw me as a person instead of property." Caleb was across the room in 2 strides. He pulled Sarah to her feet and cupped her face in his hands, looking down at her with an expression of such tender wonder that tears sprang to her eyes. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah whispered. His lips met hers softly, almost hesitantly, as though she were something precious that might break. Sarah melted into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is too soon. I know I should wait and court you properly, but Sarah, I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my days trying to make you happy." "Yes," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the little white church, with Mrs. Chen and Mr. Hoffman standing as witnesses. Sarah wore a new dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Caleb wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Sarah could barely breathe when she saw him waiting at the altar. The preacher, a kindly old man named Reverend Morris, smiled at them both and spoke about love as a choice and a commitment, about building a life together through hard work and faith. When Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto Sarah's finger, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and Caleb kissed her in front of God and their small gathering of friends, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. They spent their wedding night in Sarah's little room above the general store, which would serve as their home until they could afford something larger. Caleb was gentle and patient, and Sarah had never felt more cherished than she did in his arms that night. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Caleb stroked her hair while she rested her head on his chest. "I am going to build you a house," he said. "A real house with a garden and a porch and enough rooms for a family. It might take time, but I promise you, Sarah, I am going to give you everything you deserve." "You already have," Sarah said. "You gave me safety when I was afraid. You gave me friendship when I was alone. You gave me love when I thought I would never have it. Everything else is just details." The first year of their marriage was not easy, but it was happy. They both worked long hours, Caleb at the livery stable and Sarah at the general store. They saved every penny they could, building toward the future Caleb had promised. They lived in the tiny room above the store and learned each other's rhythms and habits. Sarah discovered that Caleb sang while he worked, tuneless but cheerful. Caleb discovered that Sarah talked to herself when she was concentrating, muttering calculations and observations under her breath. In the spring of 1879, Sarah learned she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when Dr. Wells confirmed it, she cried tears of joy in his office. That evening, she made Caleb his favorite dinner and then took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said, watching his face. Caleb went very still. Then his face split into the widest grin Sarah had ever seen, and he picked her up and spun her around the tiny room, laughing like a boy. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby." They named him Samuel, after Caleb's father, and he was born in January of 1880 during a rainstorm that turned the streets of Petaluma into rivers of mud. Sarah labored for 14 hours with Mrs. Chen and Dr. Wells in attendance, and when the baby finally arrived with a healthy squall, Caleb was allowed into the room. He took his son in his arms and wept openly, and Sarah fell in love with him all over again. Samuel was a good baby, easy-tempered and happy. He had Sarah's dark hair and Caleb's gray eyes, and both parents agreed he was the most beautiful child ever born. Sarah took 3 months off from the general store, and in that time, Caleb worked extra hours at the livery to make up for the lost income. They were exhausted and poor and happier than either had ever dreamed possible. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, Sarah was back at work, leaving the baby with Mrs. Chen during the day. It was not ideal, but it was necessary, and Mrs. Chen adored Samuel and cared for him as though he were her own grandchild. Life settled into a new rhythm, challenging but sustainable. Then, in the fall of 1880, everything changed. Mr. Hoffman called Sarah into his office one morning and told her he was retiring. His arthritis had gotten too bad to continue working, and he was planning to move to San Francisco to live with his daughter. He wanted to sell the general store, and he offered Sarah and Caleb first right of refusal. "The price is fair," he said. "I am not looking to get rich, just to cover what I invested. The store does good business. In the right hands, it could do even better. You know the inventory, Sarah. You know the customers. You would be perfect." Sarah went home that night in a daze. She and Caleb sat up late, going over their savings and what Mr. Hoffman was asking. They were short, significantly short, but not impossibly so. If they could get a loan from the bank, if they stretched every penny, if they worked even harder than they already were, they might just be able to make it work. The next morning, Caleb went to the bank and spoke to the manager, a stern man named Mr. Preston. He explained the situation and requested a loan. Mr. Preston reviewed their finances, asked pointed questions about their plans for the store, and then sat back and regarded Caleb thoughtfully. "You have a reputation in this town, Mr. Winters," he said. "People speak well of you. They say you are honest and hardworking. Your wife has impressed Mr. Hoffman considerably, which is not easy to do. I am willing to take a chance on you." The loan was approved. Sarah cried when Caleb told her the news, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. They were going to own a business. They were going to be their own bosses. The little girl who had arrived in Petaluma trembling and alone 2 years ago was going to be a business owner. They bought the store in November of 1880 and renamed it Winter's General Goods. Caleb kept his job at the livery for the first few months to ensure they had steady income, while the store established itself under new ownership. Sarah managed everything else, reorganizing the inventory, reaching out to new suppliers, and implementing the ideas she had been thinking about for months. She created a system for credit that was fair but firm. She expanded the fabric selection because she knew the ranch wives needed more variety. She added a section of ready-made clothes for people who could not afford a seamstress or did not have time to sew. She made sure the store was always clean and well lit and welcoming. Within 6 months, Winter's General Goods was doing better business than Mr. Hoffman had ever managed. Within a year, they had paid off a quarter of the loan. Caleb quit the livery and joined Sarah full-time at the store, handling the heavy work and the deliveries while Sarah managed the finances and the customers. They were a good team. More than good, they were exceptional. Where one had a weakness, the other had strength. They trusted each other completely, and that trust translated into a business that thrived. In 1882, they had their second child, a daughter they named Catherine after Sarah's mother. She was a tiny, delicate thing with Caleb's blonde hair and Sarah's brown eyes, and her older brother Samuel was instantly smitten. Sarah juggled motherhood and work with help from Mrs. Chen, and a young Mexican woman named Rosa who came to work for them part-time. By 1883, they had paid off the bank loan entirely. By 1884, they had saved enough to buy the land Caleb had been eyeing for years, a 5-acre plot just outside town with good soil and a creek running through it. They hired a crew and built a house, nothing grand but solid and well-made, with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Sarah planted a garden that first spring, putting in vegetables and flowers and herbs. She stood in the middle of it one May morning with dirt under her fingernails and the sun warm on her face, and thought about how far she had come. From Philadelphia to Petaluma, from desperate mail-order bride to business owner and mother, from trembling and alone to safe and loved. Caleb found her there and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," Sarah said. "About how scared I was that day I stepped off the train. About how you were there, and how everything that has happened since has been more than I ever dreamed possible." "I am the lucky one," Caleb said. "You took a chance on a ranch hand with nothing to his name but a worn-out saddle and a good horse. You built a life with me. You gave me a family. Sarah, you are the strongest, bravest person I have ever known." Sarah turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting sunshine and love and the promise of years still to come. "We built this life together," she corrected. "Every bit of it." In 1886, their third child arrived, another boy they named Thomas after no one in particular, simply because they liked the name and agreed it was time to move past family traditions. Thomas was a wild child from the moment he could crawl, constantly getting into mischief and making his siblings laugh. The house was loud and chaotic and full of love. The store continued to prosper. Sarah hired additional help, training 2 young women to handle sales while she focused on the business side. Caleb expanded into livestock feed and farming equipment, correctly anticipating the needs of the growing agricultural community around Petaluma. They bought the building next door and expanded, doubling their floor space. They became pillars of the community. Sarah joined the church ladies' auxiliary and helped organize fundraisers for the school. Caleb served on the town council and worked to improve the roads. They hosted dinners for friends and neighbors. They gave generously to people in need, remembering what it was like to have nothing. In 1888, 10 years after Sarah had stepped off the train, they stood together on their porch and looked out at the life they had built. 3 healthy children playing in the yard, a successful business in town, a home they owned free and clear, friends and community and respect. You ever wonder what would have happened if you had gotten on that train to meet Mercer alone? Caleb asked. If I had not been there. I try not to, Sarah admitted. It frightens me to think about, but I also think that maybe things happened exactly as they were meant to. Maybe I was meant to step off that train trembling. Maybe you were meant to be there to tell me I was safe. Maybe all of it, as terrifying as it was leading us to this. I like that idea, Caleb said. He pulled her close and kissed her temple. I love you, Sarah Winters, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow. I love you too, Sarah said, always. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his mother's head for numbers and his father's way with people. He went to work at the store when he turned 16 and showed every sign of being ready to take it over someday. Catherine was artistic and dreamy, spending hours drawing and painting the world around her. Thomas remained wild and adventurous, talking constantly about becoming a cowboy like his father had been. In 1890, Sarah's childbearing years came to an unexpected end with the birth of twins, a boy and girl they named Daniel and Grace. Caleb joked that they were going to need a bigger house, but Sarah just laughed and said they would make do. And they did, somehow fitting 5 children into their 3-bedroom house through a combination of bunk beds and creative scheduling. The store expanded again in 1892, taking over the entire block. Winters General Goods became the largest retailer in Petaluma, employing 12 people and serving customers from miles around. Sarah handled the business with the same careful attention she had learned from her father, and under her management, the store never had a single unprofitable year. Caleb remained the heart and soul of the operation, the friendly face that customers looked for when they came in. He knew everyone by name, remembered their preferences, asked about their families. He had never lost his cowboy's ease with people, his ability to make anyone feel comfortable and valued. In 1895, when Samuel was 15 and talking about his future, he asked his parents how they had met. Sarah and Caleb exchanged a glance, and then Sarah told him the whole story. About the advertisement and the letters, about Thomas Mercer and his lies, about how Caleb had met her at the train station and seen her for who she really was, about the choice they had both made, him to help her and her to trust him, and how that choice had led to everything they had now. Samuel listened with wide eyes, and when Sarah finished, he said, "So you were very brave, Mama." "We both were," Sarah said, reaching over to take Caleb's hand. "But the bravest thing I ever did was believe your father when he said I was safe. Everything else followed from that." The children grew and thrived. Samuel married a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth in 1898 and gave Sarah and Caleb their first grandchild the following year. Catherine went to San Francisco to study art and came back with a husband, a kind-eyed painter who was happy to settle in Petaluma. Thomas did indeed become a cowboy, working on a cattle ranch near Sacramento, though he came home for every holiday and special occasion. The twins, Daniel and Grace, were inseparable throughout their childhood. They both showed an interest in medicine, and Caleb and Sarah made arrangements for them to study with Dr. Wells, who had delivered all 5 of their children and was getting on in years. He was delighted to have apprentices and promised to teach them everything he knew. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Sarah and Caleb celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party at their home. It seemed like the entire town turned out to celebrate with them. Mrs. Chen, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, gave a toast about how she had known from the beginning that Sarah and Caleb were meant for each other. Mr. Preston from the bank spoke about how impressed he had been by their business acumen and integrity. Reverend Morris, who had married them, thanked them for being such exemplary members of the community. But the moment that meant the most to Sarah came late in the evening when the guests had left and the children were asleep. She and Caleb stood on their porch, just as they had done so many times before, and looked up at the stars. 20 years, Caleb said softly. It does not feel like that long. No, Sarah agreed. It feels like both forever and no time at all. She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life in every way that mattered. There was gray at his temples now and lines around his eyes, but he was still the same kind-hearted cowboy who had taken her arm and told her she was safe. I would do it all again, she said. Every hard moment, every struggle, every scared and uncertain day, I would do it all again to end up here with you. So would I, Caleb said. He pulled her close and kissed her, long and sweet and full of promise. Here is to the next 20 years, Mrs. Winters. To the next 20 years, Sarah agreed. And there were more years, good years, full years. More grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. More expansions of the business and more contributions to the community. More quiet evenings on the porch and loud family dinners around the table. Sarah and Caleb grew old together, their love deepening and strengthening with each passing year. They never forgot where they had started, that moment of terror and choice at the Petaluma train station. They talked about it sometimes, late at night when they could not sleep, marveling at how differently things could have gone, but they had not gone differently. They had gone exactly right. In 1918, when Sarah was 62 and Caleb was 65, they sold Winters General Goods to Samuel and Elizabeth, who had been running it for years anyway. They retired to the house they had built so long ago, the house that had seen so much life and love. They spent their days tending the garden, playing with grandchildren, and sitting on the porch watching the sun set. One evening in the summer of 1920, as they sat together watching fireflies rise from the grass, Sarah said, "I am glad I was trembling that day." Caleb looked at her quizzically. "What do you mean?" "When I stepped off the train," Sarah explained. "I was so scared that I was trembling. But if I had been brave and confident, maybe I would not have accepted your help. Maybe I would have marched off to meet Mercer on my own, too proud to let a stranger assist me. The trembling, the fear, it opened me up to receiving kindness. It let you save me." "You saved yourself," Caleb said, as he had said so many times before. "I just gave you a safe place to land." "We saved each other," Sarah said, which was the truth they had both come to understand over 42 years of marriage. "And I will be grateful for that, for you, for all of this, for the rest of my life." They sat in companionable silence as the stars came out one by one, the same stars they had watched from this same porch for decades. The same stars that had been shining that day in 1878 when a frightened young woman stepped off a train, and a kind young cowboy said the 4 words that would change both their lives forever. "You are safe now." And she had been. She always had been. From that moment forward, Sarah Winters had been safe and loved and home. The years continued to unfold with grace and gratitude. By 1925, When Sarah turned 69 and Caleb 72, they had 8 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. The family gathered often at the homestead, now officially known as the Winter's Place, where Sarah would cook enormous meals and Caleb would tell stories about the old days. The children and grandchildren never tired of hearing about how Sarah and Caleb had met, how love had grown from a single act of kindness. It became family legend, the story passed down through generations. The trembling bride and the cowboy who had chosen compassion over indifference. Thomas, their wild son, had settled down eventually, marrying a spirited woman named Jane and running his own cattle operation. He brought his family to visit every few months, and Caleb would spend hours with his grandsons, teaching them the skills he had learned as a young cowboy. Catherine's paintings hung in galleries in San Francisco now, and she had achieved modest fame as an artist of California landscapes. The twins, Daniel and Grace, had taken over Dr. Wells' practice when he finally retired, working together as town doctors just as they had done everything together since birth. And Samuel, the firstborn, had turned Winter's General Goods into the most successful business in Petaluma. He had his mother's shrewd business sense and his father's warmth with people, a combination that served him extraordinarily well. He and Elizabeth had 4 children of their own, all being raised with the values Sarah and Caleb had instilled from the beginning: honesty, hard work, kindness, and the importance of helping those in need. In 1928, Petaluma celebrated its 75th anniversary, and Sarah and Caleb were honored as among the town's most distinguished citizens. They had been part of the community for 50 years, had raised 5 children there, had built a business that employed dozens of people over the decades, had contributed to every church fundraiser and town improvement project. The mayor gave them a plaque and made a speech about exemplary citizenship. Sarah, standing beside Caleb on the podium in the town square, felt the weight of time and gratitude pressing on her heart. She looked out at the crowd and saw familiar faces, people she had known for decades, people whose children she had watched grow up, people whose lives had intersected with hers in 1,000 small ways. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it brief. 50 years ago, I stepped off a train into an uncertain future. I was alone and afraid and did not know what would become of me. But this town and the people in it gave me a home. They gave me a chance. They gave me a life. My husband and I have tried to repay that kindness by giving back to this community that gave us so much. We hope we have succeeded, even in some small measure. The crowd applauded, and Sarah sat down, feeling Caleb's hand close over hers. He leaned close and whispered, "You did more than succeed. You thrived." And it was true. Against all odds, despite every reason for failure, Sarah Brennan, who became Sarah Winters, had not just survived but thrived. She had taken the broken pieces of her life and built something beautiful. The 1930s brought economic hardship to much of the country as the Great Depression took hold, but the Winters family weathered it better than most. Samuel kept the store running, extending credit carefully to families he knew would pay when they could. Sarah and Caleb opened their home to neighbors who had fallen on hard times, sharing meals and offering what help they could. The values that had sustained them through their own difficult early years now sustained them through a national crisis. In 1935, on Sarah's 79th birthday, the entire family gathered at the homestead for a celebration. 23 people in total, spanning 4 generations, crowded into the house that Sarah and Caleb had built 51 years earlier. There were children running through the rooms that had once held Sarah's own babies. There were grandchildren sitting at the table where Sarah had first told Caleb she loved him. There were great-grandchildren playing in the garden Sarah had planted with her own hands. Caleb, now 82 and moving more slowly but still sharp of mind and warm of heart, stood up at dinner and raised his glass. "To my wife," he said, his voice carrying across the noisy room. 57 years ago, I met a woman at a train station. She was scared and alone, and I made her a promise. I told her she was safe. It is the best promise I ever made, because keeping it gave me this." He gestured around the crowded room. "A family, a life, more love than any man deserves. Sarah, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, rose and went to him. She kissed him in front of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and there was not a dry eye in the house. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Sarah and Caleb lay in bed together as they had done for nearly 6 decades. Caleb's arm was around her, her head on his shoulder, their bodies fitted together with the ease of long practice. "I hope I get to leave this world before you do," Sarah said quietly. "I do not think I could bear to live without you." "Do not talk about leaving," Caleb said. "We have years yet." And they did have a few more years, precious years that they filled with the simple pleasures of a life well lived. They watched more grandchildren grow up and marry. They welcomed more great-grandchildren. They tended their garden and sat on their porch and loved each other with the deep, abiding love that only comes from choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through every joy and sorrow. Caleb passed first, in his sleep on a quiet night in March of 1938. He was 85 years old and had lived to see his family prosper and his name honored. Sarah found him in the morning, peaceful and still, and though her heart shattered into a million pieces, she was grateful that he had gone gently. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire town of Petaluma. Caleb Winters had touched countless lives with his kindness and integrity, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. Sarah sat in the front row of the church, surrounded by her children, and listened to person after person stand up and speak about her husband's generosity, his humor, his fairness, his goodness. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah stood on shaking legs and looked out at the packed church. "My husband saved my life," she said simply. "Not just once, but every day we were together. He saw me when I needed to be seen. He valued me when I needed to be valued. He loved me when I needed to be loved. The world is a darker place without him, but it is a better place for having had him in it. I will miss him every moment of every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single second of our time together." Sarah lived for 3 more years after Caleb passed, years that were quieter and slower, but not without their own bittersweet beauty. She spent her days with her children and grandchildren, passing on stories and recipes, and the wisdom she had accumulated over 80-plus years. She tended the garden that she and Caleb had planted together, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of growth and harvest. On her 85th birthday, surrounded by family, someone asked Sarah what advice she had for a long and happy life. She thought for a moment, then said, "Find someone who makes you feel safe. Not someone who makes decisions for you or protects you from everything, but someone who creates space for you to be fully yourself. And when you find that person, hold on to them. Choose them every day. Build a life together that matters." Sarah Winters passed peacefully in her sleep on a warm June night in 1941, 85 years old, and surrounded by evidence of a life extraordinarily well lived. She left behind 5 children, 8 grandchildren, 12 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. She left behind a business that still bore her name and employed 3 generations of Petaluma residents. She left behind a legacy of kindness and strength, and the radical act of choosing love even when circumstances suggested fear. At her funeral, Samuel stood up and told the story one more time. How his mother had stepped off a train trembling, alone and afraid. How his father had been there to meet her, a kind cowboy who had seen a woman in distress and chosen to help without thought of reward. How that single moment of compassion had blossomed into a love story that spanned 63 years and created a family that would carry on their legacy for generations to come. "My parents taught us that safety is not the absence of danger," Samuel said. "It is the presence of someone who chooses to stand with you. My father gave my mother that gift the day they met, and she returned it every day thereafter. That is their legacy to us, not the business or the property or the money, though those things have their place. Their legacy is the understanding that love is a choice, made daily, with intention and commitment. And that when you make that choice, when you truly commit to another person's well-being and happiness, miracles can happen." The family laid Sarah to rest beside Caleb in the Petaluma cemetery, under a large oak tree with a view of the rolling California hills. Their shared headstone bore simple words: Caleb and Sarah Winters, partners in life and love, together forever. In the years that followed, the Winters family continued to grow and prosper. The store remained in family hands for another 3 generations. The homestead became a gathering place for family reunions, carefully maintained and treasured. The story of how Sarah and Caleb met became the foundation of family identity, a reminder of where they came from and the values that defined them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the stars came out, descendants of Sarah and Caleb Winters would stand on that old porch and look up at the sky. They would think about the frightened young woman who had stepped off a train into an uncertain future. They would think about the kind young cowboy who had offered his hand and his help without asking for anything in return. They would think about how a single moment of compassion, one person choosing to help another, can ripple forward through generations. The train station where Sarah had arrived still stood in Petaluma, though trains no longer stopped there with the same frequency. But the platform remained, weathered by time but solid, and it bore a small brass plaque installed by the Historical Society in 1975. The plaque told the story, in brief, of Sarah Brennan and Caleb Winters, 2 people whose love story had become woven into the fabric of the town itself. Tourists sometimes stopped to read the plaque and smile at the romance of it. Locals knew the full story, passed down through families and friend groups, embellished slightly with each telling but remaining true in its essence. The mail-order bride who trembled, the cowboy who said she was safe. The life they built together. It became the kind of story people told when they needed to believe in goodness, when they needed to remember that kindness matters, when they needed hope that love could triumph over circumstance. It was a story that reminded people that the best things in life often come from the moments when we choose compassion over convenience, when we extend help to strangers, when we see the humanity in others and act accordingly. Because that is what Caleb Winters had done on a dusty platform in 1878. He had seen a woman in need and recognized her humanity. He had offered help without expectation of reward. He had created space for her to make her own choices while ensuring she had the resources to do so. And in return, he had received love beyond measure, a family that thrived, and a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. And Sarah, for her part, had made the courageous choice to accept that help, to trust a stranger, to believe in the possibility of safety when everything in her circumstances suggested otherwise. She had taken the chance Caleb offered and built something remarkable from it. She had proven that strength is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Their story was not perfect or fairy tale simple. They had struggled and worked and faced challenges. They had worried about money and children and business and all the ordinary concerns of ordinary people. But through it all, they had each other. They had built their love on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values, and that foundation had proven strong enough to support everything they dreamed of achieving. In the end, the legacy of Sarah and Caleb Winters was not about the business they built or the property they accumulated or the recognition they received. Their legacy was about the choice to see each other, truly see each other, in a moment of desperate need and profound vulnerability. It was about the promise made and kept. You are safe now. And then proving, day after day for more than 60 years, that safety and love and partnership were not just words but commitments honored. The sun set on Petaluma countless times after Sarah and Caleb were gone, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The town changed and grew, buildings rising where fields had been, roads expanding, new families arriving to replace old ones. But some things remained constant. The values the Winters family had embodied: hard work, integrity, kindness, love continued to shape the community. And on quiet evenings, when descendants of Sarah and Caleb gathered on that old porch or walked through the streets of Petaluma, they sometimes felt the presence of their ancestors like a blessing. They felt the echo of that long-ago moment when a frightened woman had accepted the help of a kind man, and in doing so, had set in motion a story of love that would never truly end, because love like that does not end. It transforms and carries forward, living on in children and grandchildren and the choices they make. It lives on in acts of kindness extended to strangers, in the willingness to help without expectation of reward, in the courage to trust when trust seems impossible. It lives on in every person who chooses compassion, who offers safety, who sees the humanity in others and responds with care. That was the true legacy of Sarah and Caleb Winters. Not just their own love story, beautiful as it was, but the inspiration it provided to everyone who heard it. The reminder that we all have the power to change lives through simple acts of decency. That the words, "You are safe now," can transform everything when spoken with genuine care and backed by meaningful action. And so the story endured, passed down through generations, adapted and retold but never losing its essential truth. The mail-order bride stepped off the train trembling. The cowboy said, "You are safe now." And from that moment forward, both of their lives became more than they had ever imagined possible. That is the way of love, when it is real and true and built on solid ground. It grows and expands and creates more of itself, rippling outward in ways that cannot be predicted or contained. It becomes something larger than the two people who started it, something that blesses everyone it touches. Sarah and Caleb understood this. They lived it every day of their long lives together. And when they died, having given everything they had to each other and to their family and to their community, they left behind a world that was measurably better for their having been in it. That is not a small thing. In fact, it is everything.